Be my wife before the river freezes. Delia Mercer was certain she had misheard him. She was standing on the plank landing of her river crossing, up to her wrists in cold water wringing out a wash, and the Lakota warrior named Ohitika had ridden down to the bank the way he did every autumn to trade, and he had said a string of words that could not possibly have been the words she thought she heard. So Delia did the sensible thing. She asked him to say it again, sure that the river's noise had garbled some ordinary sentence about furs or crossing rights into something absurd. Be my wife, Ohitika said again, slower, so there could be no mistake, before the river freezes. I am asking you to marry me, Delia Mercer. I have 3 weeks, until the ice closes the crossing. I would like an answer before then. Delia stood very still, with the cold, wet wash in her hands, and her first feeling was not joy or surprise, but a hard, familiar wariness, because Delia Mercer had been proposed to before, several times, and every single proposal had been a man trying to get his hands on her river crossing. She ran the only reliable ferry and trading landing for 40 miles, left to her by her father, and it was worth a good deal of money. And Delia had learned young that a woman who owns a valuable thing does not get courted for herself. She gets courted for the thing she owns. 3 men had asked for her hand in 5 years, and all 3 had turned out to want the crossing. And Delia had sent all 3 away and grown a shell around her heart, the exact thickness of her disappointment. So she looked at Ohitika, this warrior who had traded at her landing every autumn for years, and her wary mind supplied the only explanation it knew. He wanted the crossing. The band must want control of the ferry, the trade, the river passage. It was the same old game in new dress. Delia did not yet understand how wrong she was, or that Ohitika wanted the one thing none of the others had, which was Delia herself, and none of her crossing at all. To understand why Delia Mercer heard a marriage proposal and thought first of theft, you have to understand her crossing and what owning it had taught her. Her father, a hard, practical man named Josiah Mercer, had built the landing when Delia was a girl, at the one place for 40 miles where the river ran shallow and slow enough to ford, and where a ferry could carry wagons across in the high water. It had made Josiah a modest fortune, as such crossings did, taking a toll from every wagon and trader and traveler who needed to reach the other side. When Josiah died, he left it all to Delia, his only child, because there was no one else, and Delia, at 21, had found herself the owner of the most valuable piece of ground in the county, and the object of a great deal of sudden interest. The interest was never in Delia. She learned that fast, and she learned it hard. The men who came courting looked at her and saw the ferry. They talked to her and calculated the toll income. They complimented her plain face, while their eyes wandered to the landing and the trade cabin and the good bottom land. The first proposal had come within a month of her father's burial, before Delia had even finished grieving, from a man twice her age who could not keep the greed out of his voice. The second and third had been smoother, but no different underneath. Every man who wanted Delia Mercer wanted the river, and Delia had come to understand that this was simply the price of owning something valuable while being a woman, that she would never know if a man wanted her or her toll booth, and that the safest thing was to want no one at all, so she ran the crossing alone. She was good at it, better than her father had been, fair and shrewd and unafraid, and she had made the landing prosper. But she had grown lonely inside her prosperity, a woman rich in the one thing that made her unlovable, guarding a valuable river with a heart she had shut up tight, because opening it had only ever gotten her appraised like a parcel of land. Ohitika had traded at her landing for years. He had always dealt with her honestly, which she had noted, because so few did. But when he proposed, Delia's whole hard history rose up and told her the only story it knew, which was that here was one more man after her river. "I know what you want," Delia said, when she had wrung out the last of the wash and set it aside and gathered her wariness around her. "You want the crossing. Your band wants control of the ferry and the trade. I understand it. It is good business, and I do not even blame you for it. But I will not marry a man for my river, Ohitika. Not you and not anyone, so you may as well save us both the trouble." Ohitika looked at her for a long moment, and something like sadness crossed his face, or perhaps it was understanding. "You have been asked before," he said. It was not a question. "By men who wanted the river, by every man who has ever asked," Delia said. 3 of them in 5 years, and all 3 of them looking at the landing over my shoulder the whole time they spoke pretty words. So I have learned to hear a proposal and know what it truly is. It is not about me. It is never about me. It is about this." She gestured at the ferry, the cabin, the valuable crossing. "So do not dress it up. If your band wants the river, make me an honest offer for it, and I will consider it as business. But do not ask for my hand as though you wanted me, because I stopped believing that particular lie a long time ago." Ohitika did not argue with her. That was the first thing that unsettled Delia, because the other men had argued, had protested that of course they wanted her, had laid the false sincerity on thick. Ohitika only looked at her with that sad understanding, and then he said something that did not fit the story she had told herself. "My band does not want your river," Ohitika said. "We are leaving this country, Delia. Before the ice closes the crossing, we move north to the winter grounds, 3 weeks from here, and after that, I do not know when I will pass this way again, if ever. I am not asking for your ferry. I will never use your ferry again. That is exactly why I must ask now, before the river freezes, because after it freezes I will be gone, and the chance will be gone with me. If I wanted your crossing, I would have every reason to stay and none to leave. I am leaving. I want you to come with me. What use would your river be to a man riding north away from it?" Delia had no answer for that. It was the one thing that did not fit. A man after her ferry would want to stay. This man was leaving, giving up the river entirely, and asking her to leave it too. For the first time in 5 years, a proposal did not match the only pattern Delia knew. Delia did not accept Ohitika's proposal that day. She was too well armored for that, but she could not dismiss it either, the way she had dismissed the others, because it did not behave like the others. And Delia was too shrewd a woman to ignore a fact that did not fit. She turned it over that night, alone in her cabin above the crossing, the way she turned over any puzzle. Every proposal she had ever received had come from a man who wanted to stay at the river, to own it, to profit from it. Ohitika was leaving the river forever, in 3 weeks. He could not profit from a crossing he would never see again. If he had wanted the ferry, the last thing he would do is ride north and abandon the country entirely. The logic of it kept catching Delia off guard, because for 5 years the logic had always run the other way, and here it ran backward. And backward logic meant that maybe, just maybe, this proposal was about the one thing no proposal had ever been about, which was her. She was afraid to believe it. That was the truth underneath her wariness. It was not really that Delia thought every man was a liar. It was that she had wanted, for 5 lonely years, to be wanted for herself, and had been disappointed every single time. And the wanting and being disappointed had hurt so badly that she had decided it was safer to believe no one could want her than to hope someone might, and be proved wrong again. Her shell was not made of suspicion. It was made of self-protection. If she never believed a man wanted her, she could never be crushed by learning he only wanted her river. Ohitika's proposal cracked that shell, because it did not fit the theft she had braced for. And a proposal that was not about the river was a proposal she did not know how to defend against. She found herself, over the next days, watching him differently as he made his trades at her landing and prepared for the band's departure. She found herself noticing that in all the years he had traded with her, he had never once tried to cheat her, never once let his eyes wander to her property while he spoke to her, always looked at her face when he addressed her, as though her face were the point and not an obstacle. She had noted these things over the years without understanding them. Now she understood them. Ohitika had been treating her like a person, not a river, for years, and she had been too armored to see it. Ohitika had wanted Delia Mercer for a long time, longer than she knew, and he had never spoken of it because the moment had never been right, and now the moment was almost gone. He had first taken real notice of her 4 autumns before, watching her run her crossing. He had watched a young woman, alone, manage a hard business fairly and shrewdly, standing up to rough men twice her size, never cheating anyone, and never letting anyone cheat her, carrying a heavy load with a straight back and no complaint. He had admired her before he had wanted her, and the wanting had grown slowly out of the admiring, year by year, autumn by autumn, as he traded at her landing and came to know the fair, guarded, lonely woman who owned the river. He had seen the wariness in her, and he had understood some of where it came from, because a man notices when a woman flinches at kindness, and he had gone gently, never pressing, treating her with the plain respect he would show anyone, which was, though he did not fully know it, the very thing that set him apart in her eyes. He had meant to court her properly, slowly, the way such a guarded woman deserved to be courted, but the world had not given him a slow autumn. The band was being pushed north, off the country they had ranged for generations, herded toward the distant winter grounds by the same hard machinery that was herding all the Lakota, and Ohitika had no choice but to go with his people. It was that or abandon them, and a man does not abandon his people, so the slow courtship he had imagined was not to be. He had 3 weeks until the river froze and the crossing closed, and the band moved beyond return. 3 weeks to win a woman who had been taught by every previous suitor to distrust the very idea of being won. It was a poor hand to be dealt, and Ohitika knew it. To propose so suddenly, with so little time, to a woman as wary as Delia, was almost certain to fail. A slow courtship might have melted her shell over a year or 2. 3 weeks was not enough, but 3 weeks was what he had, and Ohitika had decided that he would rather ask and be refused than ride north with the words unsaid and spend the rest of his life wondering. So he had ridden down to the landing and said the thing plainly, "Be my wife before the river freezes," and watched her assume it was about the ferry, and understood that he had 3 weeks to prove to Delia Mercer that for the first time in her life, a man wanted her and not her river. Ohitika could not win Delia with words. She had heard too many pretty words from men who wanted her crossing, and she trusted words not at all. So he did not try to win her with words. He tried to win her with the only thing she did trust, which was actions, small and honest and hard to fake. He kept trading at the landing through those 3 weeks, as the band prepared to move, and in his dealings with Delia, he was scrupulously, almost aggressively fair, refusing to let her undercharge him, insisting on paying full toll and full price, so that she could never once say he was after a bargain. When rough men came to the crossing and made trouble, as rough men did, Ohitika found reasons to be near, and his quiet presence ended the trouble, and he never once made a show of it or asked for thanks. He noticed the heavy work that a woman alone struggled with, the wagon she could barely winch onto the ferry, the woodpile that needed splitting before the freeze, and he did those things without being asked and without lingering to be praised for them. None of it was about the river. That was what began to reach Delia. A man who wanted her crossing would have been angling to get his hands on it, learning its workings, positioning himself to run it. Ohitika did the opposite. He helped her run it better as her own, asked nothing about its income, made no move to insert himself into its ownership, and spoke, when he spoke of the future at all, only of the winter grounds far to the north, where there was no river crossing, and no ferry, and no toll, only his people, and a hard, beautiful country, and a life he wanted her to share. Delia found her shell cracking, and it frightened her, because a cracked shell is a vulnerable thing. One evening, unable to bear the not knowing, she confronted him directly, the way she confronted everything. "Why me?" Delia asked. "Truly, Ohitika, you are a warrior of your band. You could have a wife among your own people, a woman who knows your ways, who would not be a stranger in your camp. Why would you ask a guarded white woman who owns a ferry you do not even want? Give me the true reason, because I have heard every false one, and I will know the difference." "The true reason," Ohitika said, "is that 4 autumns ago, I watched you winch a loaded wagon onto your ferry by yourself, in the rain, after a big man had laughed at you and refused to help, and you did not curse him, or weep, or give up. You set your back and you did the work, and you got the wagon across, and you took his toll with a straight face. And I thought, there is a woman with more strength in her than most warriors I have known. That is when it began. Not the river. You. The way you carry a hard thing without breaking. The way you are fair to everyone, even though almost no one is fair to you. The way you have been alone for years and have not let it turn you cruel." Delia stared at him. It was not the kind of thing the other men had said. The other men had complimented her face, insincerely, while their eyes measured her property. Ohitika had just told her he had fallen for the way she winched a wagon in the rain. "I know you have been asked by men who wanted your river," Ohitika went on. "I have watched a few of them come and go, over the years, and I saw how they looked at your landing while they spoke to you, and I saw how it hardened you, a little more each time. I did not want to be one more of those men, so I said nothing for years, and I meant to court you slowly, honestly, until you could believe I was different. The freezing of the river has taken my slow courtship from me, so now I must simply tell you the truth quickly, and hope you can hear it. I do not want your ferry, Delia. I am riding away from your ferry forever in a few days. I want the woman who winches wagons in the rain and takes no man's cruelty and has been lonely too long. I want you, only you. If I could carry your river north on my back to prove it, I would leave it here in the mud and never look at it again." Delia felt something break open in her chest, the shell she had built over 5 years of appraising suitors, and behind it was the thing she had hidden even from herself, which was how badly she had wanted, all along, to be wanted like this. "You are leaving in a few days," she said, her voice not quite steady. "How do I know?" "How do I know you are not simply saying what you must to get an answer before you have to go? I have 3 days to decide the rest of my life, on the word of a man who will be gone whether I believe him or not. The trouble with an honest proposal on a short clock is that the shortness itself looks like a trick." Delia knew it, and Ohitika knew she knew it, and there was no easy way past it. "You are right that the time is cruel," Ohitika admitted. "If I had years, I could prove myself slowly, and you could come to trust me by inches, the way a guarded person should be allowed to. The freeze has stolen that from us both. I cannot give you years. I can only give you the truth, and 3 weeks of small actions, and ask you to weigh them. So weigh them, Delia. Have I in these weeks done one single thing to get my hands on your river? Have I asked about its income, angled to run it, tried to make myself its master? Or have I paid full toll when you would have charged me less, and split your wood, and helped you with the heavy work, and spoken only of a life far to the north, where your river cannot follow us? Weigh what I have done, not what I have said. You told me yourself, you trust actions and not words. So judge me by my actions. They are all I have to offer in the little time the river has left us. Delia did weigh it over the last hard days before the freeze, and the weighing was the most difficult thing she had done since burying her father, because Ohitika was right. In 3 weeks he had done nothing, not one single thing, that a man after her ferry would do. Every action pointed the same direction, away from the river and toward her. The pattern that had held for 5 years, the pattern of men who wanted the crossing, simply did not fit Ohitika, no matter how hard Delia's frightened heart tried to force it. And if the pattern did not fit, then the thing she had refused to let herself believe for 5 years might at last be true. A man might want her. This man might want her, not the river, her. The fear of believing it was enormous. If she believed it and was wrong, she would lose everything. Her guarded heart cracked open and crushed one final time. But if she refused to believe it and was right that he was sincere, she would lose something too. She would lose the one man in 5 years who had wanted her for herself, watch him ride north over the frozen river, and spend the rest of her life alone on a valuable crossing, having sent away the only person who ever loved the woman instead of the toll booth. The cold came down hard on the last night, and Delia stood on her landing and watched the first skin of ice forming at the quiet edges of the river, and she knew that her 3 weeks had shrunk to hours. The band was ready to move. She could see the fires of their camp across the water, the lodges half struck, the whole people poised to go north with the dawn, before the ice grew thick enough to trap them on the wrong side of a hard winter. Ohitika would be among them. In the morning, he would cross her ferry one last time, or ford the shallows, and ride north, and she would never see him again. The river that had made her father's fortune and defined her whole life was about to freeze, and freeze her future along with it, into whichever shape she chose tonight. Delia thought about the 5 years of loneliness on the crossing. She thought about the 3 suitors who had wanted the river and not her, and the way each one had made her a little more certain she was unlovable. She thought about Ohitika, winching her wagons and splitting her wood and paying full toll when she would have charged him less, and telling her he had loved her since he watched her carry a hard thing in the rain without breaking. She thought about the 2 futures in front of her. One was safe. She could keep her river, her prosperous, lonely river, and let the warrior ride north, and never risk her guarded heart again. The other was terrifying. She could leave the river, the only thing she had ever owned, the source of all her security, and ride north into a hard, strange life, with a man she had known for years, across a trading counter, but was choosing to trust with everything, safe and lonely, or terrifying and loved. Delia stood on her landing in the biting cold and understood that this was the true choice, that it had never really been about whether Ohitika wanted her river, that his proposal had only forced her to face the question she had been avoiding for 5 years, which was whether she was brave enough to want a life instead of just guarding a possession. In the gray before dawn, Delia Mercer made her choice. She banked the fire in her cabin, and she packed a small bundle of what she could carry, and she walked down to the frozen edge of the river to find Ohitika before the band moved north. She found him already mounted at the head of the shallows, waiting with his people for the light to grow enough to cross. He saw her coming through the gray dawn, and he went very still, the way a man goes still when his whole future is walking toward him, and he does not yet know what it will say. "You told me to weigh your actions, and not your words," Delia said, stopping in front of his horse, her breath clouding in the cold. "So I weighed them. 3 weeks, Ohitika. And you did not do one single thing a man after my river would do. Not one. Every man before you wanted the crossing, and showed it in 100 small ways. You wanted me, and showed it in 100 small ways, and I was too frightened and too well armored to let myself see it, until the river started to freeze." Her voice shook. "I have spent 5 years believing no one could want me for myself, because believing it was safer than hoping and being crushed again. You have made it impossible to keep believing it, and now the ice is coming, and I have to choose, so I am choosing. I do not want to keep my river and lose the one man who ever wanted the woman instead of the toll. I would rather leave it all in the mud, the way you said, and go north with you, and find out what it is to be loved for myself." Ohitika reached down from his horse, and Delia took his hand, and he pulled her up before him, and for a moment neither of them could speak. "You are certain," Ohitika said at last, quietly, near her ear. "The river made you a wealthy woman. The winter grounds are hard, and my people are being driven, and I can promise you a life of struggle and love, but very little of ease. You are certain you choose this." "I have been wealthy and alone for 5 years," Delia said. "I know exactly what that is worth. It is worth nothing next to this. Take me north, Ohitika, before the river freezes. You asked me before the freeze, the way you said you would. And I am answering before the freeze. Yes." They crossed with the dawn, the whole band moving north over the shallows, before the ice could thicken to trap them, and Delia Mercer rode among them, leaving behind the river crossing that had been her whole life and her whole prison both. She did not look back for long. There was a strange lightness in her, she found, in leaving the valuable thing behind. For 5 years the river had been her security and her cage at once, the possession that made her prosperous and the possession that made every man who approached her suspect. Riding away from it, she felt the weight of it lift, the weight of always guarding, always suspecting, always wondering what a man truly wanted. Ohitika wanted her. He had proved it in the only currency she trusted, by riding away from her fortune to ask for her. There was nothing left to guard against. She could simply be wanted, and want in return, for the first time in her adult life. She arranged, before she left, for the crossing to be run by an honest older couple she trusted, with the income to come to her should she ever need it, because Delia. But her heart did not go north with any regret for the river. It went north whole, unburdened, glad. The life in the winter grounds was as hard as Ohitika had promised, and Delia had never done such work, and she was clumsy at it at first, the way any newcomer is. But she had run a hard business alone for 5 years, and she was not afraid of work or of hardship. And the band came to respect the white woman, who had left a fortune to ride north with their warrior, and who set her back to the hard tasks without complaint. She learned their ways, she learned their language, and she learned, day by day, the thing she had stopped believing she would ever learn, which was what it felt like to be loved for exactly who she was, the woman who winched wagons in the rain and took no man's cruelty, the woman Ohitika had wanted all along, and not the river at all. Delia Mercer lived the rest of her life among Ohitika's people, and she never once regretted the river she left frozen behind her. She would think of it sometimes, the crossing, the toll booth, the 5 lonely, prosperous years, and she would marvel at how close she had come to keeping it, and losing everything that mattered. If Ohitika had wanted her river, she would have known how to refuse him. the way she had refused all the others. She was expert at refusing men who wanted her possessions. It was a man who wanted nothing but her that she had almost failed to recognize, because she had never met one before and had stopped believing they existed. The freezing of the river had forced her hand, and forcing her hand had saved her, because left to her own careful caution, she might have guarded her heart until it froze over as hard as the crossing. She and Ohitika had children, and Delia raised them in the hard, beautiful country of the winter grounds, and she taught them, among other things, the difference between being wanted for what you have and being wanted for who you are, because it was the great lesson of her own life, and she did not want them to learn it as slowly and painfully as she had. When the young ones asked how the white grandmother had come to leave a rich river and ride north with a warrior, Delia would tell them about the 3 men who wanted her ferry and the one who did not. Every man who ever asked for my hand wanted my crossing, Delia would say. Every one, for 5 years, until I was certain that a possession was the only thing about me anyone could want. And then your grandfather asked me to marry him 3 weeks before the river froze, and rode away from that river forever to do it, and it took me almost too long to understand that a man riding away from your fortune to ask for your hand is the only man whose asking you can trust. I nearly kept the river and lost him. Do not do that, little ones. Do not let the fear of being wanted for the wrong reasons make you refuse the one person who wants you for the right ones. The river froze behind me, and I have never missed it for a single day. What I would have missed, if I had stayed to guard it, is everything.